A credit card balance gets wiped out the same day the bill shows up. No interest charged. No lingering debt. Everything looks clean and under control. Then a notification appears. The credit score drops. Not because of a missed payment. Not because of overspending. Just a drop that doesn't seem to match the behavior. That moment feels confusing because everything about the decision looked responsible. Pay the bill, avoid interest, stay disciplined. But the system doesn't work the way most people expect. It doesn't track behavior in real time. It doesn't reward effort the moment it happens. Instead, it captures a single snapshot each month, and that snapshot becomes the version of reality that gets judged. And that snapshot often shows the worst moment, not the best one. Imagine a card with a $5,000 limit. Spending adds up over the month. Groceries, gas, a few larger purchases, and the balance reaches $2,000. No stress, because the cash is already sitting in a bank account ready to cover it. The plan is simple. Wait for the statement, then pay everything off. The statement closes with that $2,000 balance. That number gets reported. Only after that does the payment happen. From a personal perspective, the account is handled perfectly. From the system's perspective, it looks like 40% of the available credit is being used. That's the number that matters. That's the number that influences the score. And that's where the idea of aggressively paying off debt starts to run into problems. Because speed alone isn't what matters. Timing is. Without controlling timing, even perfect behavior can produce imperfect results. This becomes more important when looking at how much weight utilization carries. Around 30% of a credit score is tied to how much of the available credit is being used at any given time. That's a massive portion. It means even temporary spikes, balances that exist for only a few days, can have a noticeable impact if they're captured at the wrong moment. Now, take a step back and look at a common mindset. Debt is treated like an emergency that needs to be eliminated as quickly as possible. Every extra dollar goes toward paying it down. Savings get trimmed, investments get paused. The focus becomes singular. Get rid of the balance, and at first, that approach feels powerful. Numbers drop quickly. Progress is visible. There's a sense of momentum, but there's a hidden trade-off happening in the background. Liquidity starts disappearing. Cash reserves shrink. Flexibility fades. The ability to handle unexpected expenses weakens, and nothing tests a financial strategy like the unexpected. A car repair shows up out of nowhere. A medical expense appears. Income gets interrupted. Something breaks, something shifts, something demands attention immediately. Without cash available, there's only one option left. Use credit again. But this time, the situation is different. The decision isn't planned. It's reactive. And often, the balance doesn't get paid off immediately. Interest starts building. Stress increases. And the progress that felt so strong just weeks earlier starts to reverse. That's where aggressive payoff backfires. Not because paying debt is wrong, but because eliminating liquidity creates fragility. Cash and debt aren't opposites in a simple sense. They work together. One provides flexibility, the other represents obligation. Remove too much flexibility and the system becomes brittle. Now compare two different approaches to the same situation. One person goes all in on debt payoff. Every extra dollar goes toward balances. Savings accounts get drained to accelerate progress. The goal is to reach zero as fast as possible. Another person takes a more balanced route. Debt still gets paid down, but not at the expense of having no cash. A small emergency fund stays intact. Payments are made strategically, not just quickly. Both are reducing debt, but only one is building resilience at the same time. That difference doesn't show up immediately. It shows up when something goes wrong, because the second approach has room to absorb shocks. The first one doesn't. Now bring credit utilization back into the picture. Utilization is simple on the surface. It's the percentage of available credit being used. But the way it's interpreted is tiered. Above 30%, risk starts to increase. Above 50%, it becomes more serious. Near the limit, it signals distress. These thresholds matter because they influence how the system reacts. And since the system only sees what's reported at the statement closing date, the timing of payments becomes critical. Pay too late, and high balances get recorded. pay too early, and everything drops to zero, and that leads to another surprising outcome. A zero balance across all accounts isn't actually ideal. It sounds like perfection. No debt, no risk, no problem. But the scoring models don't interpret it that way. When every account reports zero, it can look like no credit is being used at all. And from the system's perspective, that provides very little data. There's no demonstration of how credit is being managed, only an absence of activity. So a small balance, something minimal, controlled, and intentional, often performs better than zero. Roughly 1% to 7% utilization tends to hit the sweet spot. That creates a strange dynamic. Paying everything off instantly might feel like the safest move, but it can lead to either high reported balances or no reported activity at all, depending on timing. Neither outcome is optimal, and this is where strategy starts to matter more than speed. Instead of reacting to the due date, attention shifts to the statement closing date. That's the moment when the snapshot is taken. Paying down balances a few days before that date ensures that the reported number is low. Not zero, but low enough to signal control without eliminating activity. Then, after the statement closes, the remaining balance can be paid off before the due date. No interest gets charged, but the credit profile reflects responsible usage. This distinction is critical, because reporting a balance and carrying a balance are not the same thing. A balance can appear on a statement and still be paid off in full before interest applies. That's where many misunderstandings come from. The assumption is that any balance leads to interest, but in reality it's about whether that balance is paid by the due date. Now connect this back to liquidity. When every dollar is used to eliminate debt immediately, there's less flexibility to manage timing, less ability to leave small balances strategically, less room to adjust when needed, and more dependence on rigid habits that don't always align with how the system works. That rigidity becomes a problem when circumstances change, because financial systems aren't static. Expenses fluctuate, income shifts, opportunities appear and disappear, and strategies that rely on perfection tend to break under pressure. A balanced approach, on the other hand, adapts. It allows for adjustments. It maintains a buffer. It prioritizes both progress and stability. Now consider interest rates. Not all debt deserves the same urgency. High-interest debt, anything above around 15%, is expensive. Eliminating it quickly makes sense. But lower-interest debt, in the range of 4% to 6%, behaves differently. The cost of carrying that debt is relatively low compared to the value of maintaining liquidity. So directing every available dollar toward eliminating it might not be the best move. Because once that money is used, it's no longer accessible. And accessing it again often requires borrowing, sometimes at higher rates. That's the trade-off. Paying down low-interest debt too aggressively can reduce flexibility without providing a proportional benefit. Meanwhile, keeping some cash available preserves options. And options matter more than they seem, because they determine how quickly and effectively unexpected situations can be handled. This is where the idea of balance becomes central. Not balance in a vague sense, but in a deliberate, structured way. Debt gets reduced consistently, but not at the cost of having no cash. Utilization stays low, but not zero. Payments are timed to influence reporting, not just to eliminate balances. And decisions are guided by context, interest rates, upcoming expenses, and overall stability. Without that balance, even disciplined behavior can lead to unintended consequences, because the system rewards specific patterns, not just good intentions. And understanding those patterns changes everything. Now shift the focus to what actually happens after that snapshot gets taken. Spending continues normally throughout the month. Small purchases, recurring bills, maybe a larger expense here and there. Nothing out of the ordinary. The balance builds gradually, but it's all manageable. Then the statement closing date arrives. At that exact moment, whatever balance exists becomes the official version of reality that gets reported to the credit bureaus. It doesn't matter if that balance is paid off the next day. It doesn't matter if there's zero intention of carrying it. It doesn't matter if the cash is already sitting in the bank ready to wipe it out. The system only sees what exists at that specific point in time. And that's where timing starts to matter more than effort. Because if payments happen after that moment, they don't influence what gets reported. So a pattern forms without being obvious. Balances rise during the month. The statement captures that higher number. Then the balance gets paid off in full. Rinse and repeat. From the outside, it looks like perfect discipline. But from the system's perspective, it looks like consistently high utilization. That mismatch is what creates confusion. Now take that same behavior and shift it slightly. Instead of waiting for the statement to close, the balance gets reduced a few days before. Not completely eliminated, just lowered to a small amount. Then the statement closes. Now the snapshot shows a very low balance instead of a high one. That small difference in timing completely changes how the behavior is interpreted. Nothing else changes. Spending habits stay the same. Payments still happen in full. No interest is paid. But the reported data tells a different story. And that story is what influences the score. This is why the idea of paying off debt too fast isn't really about speed in isolation. It's about when that speed is applied, because paying immediately after the statement can be just as ineffective, from a reporting standpoint, as paying much later, and paying everything down to zero before the statement introduces another issue. A completely clean slate might feel ideal, but it removes visible activity. And without activity, the system has less to evaluate. So the goal shifts again. Not zero, not high, but controlled. A small reported balance that signals usage without risk. Then paid off before the due date. No interest. Just optimized timing. But even this approach has limits if pushed too far. Because once the mechanics become clear, there's a temptation to over-optimize. Multiple payments throughout the month. Constantly resetting the balance. Using the card, paying it off, then using it again repeatedly. At first it feels like gaining control. But there's a hidden boundary. It's called credit cycling. This happens when the total spending within a billing cycle exceeds the credit limit by repeatedly paying down the balance and reusing it. For example, a card with a $1,000 limit gets used for $1,000, paid off, then used again for another $1,000, and then again. On paper, the balance never exceeds the limit at any single moment, but the total activity tells a different story. And from the lender's perspective, that pattern can raise red flags. It can look like unusual behavior, potential risk, something outside normal usage. That can lead to account reviews, restrictions, or even closures. So even strategies that seem smart can create problems if taken too far. That's the pattern that keeps showing up. Extremes tend to break. Whether it's paying too slowly, paying too aggressively, or optimizing too heavily, pushing to the edge introduces new risks. Balance, once again, becomes the stabilizing factor. Now bring liquidity back into focus, because this is where the real consequences show up. When all available cash gets funneled into debt payoff, there's nothing left to absorb shocks. No buffer, no margin. And when something unexpected happens, the only option is to borrow again. But now it's different. Because this time, the borrowing isn't controlled. It's reactive, often at higher interest rates, often under pressure, and often without a clear plan to pay it off immediately. That's how aggressive payoff strategies can quietly undo themselves. The intention is to eliminate debt, but the execution creates a situation where new debt becomes more likely, not less. Now compare that with a more balanced structure. Debt still gets paid down, but not at the cost of having zero cash. A small emergency fund remains in place. Utilization is managed by adjusting when payments are made, not just how much is paid. Spending stays within reasonable limits, and there's no need to constantly reset the system. That approach doesn't feel as aggressive. Progress might look slower on the surface, but it holds up better under stress. Because when something unexpected happens, it doesn't force a complete reset. It gets handled within the existing structure. And that stability compounds over time. Now bring interest rates into the conversation again. Because not all debt deserves the same urgency. High interest balances, those above roughly 15%, are expensive. Carrying them for long periods adds significant cost. Those should be prioritized, but lower interest debt, around 4% to 6%, is different. The cost of holding that debt is relatively low, so aggressively eliminating it at the expense of liquidity doesn't always make sense, because the trade-off becomes clear. Cash that could provide flexibility gets locked into paying down something that isn't urgent, and once that cash is gone, accessing it again usually requires borrowing, sometimes at higher rates than the original debt. So the decision isn't just about eliminating balances, It's about comparing costs, the cost of interest versus the value of flexibility, and in many cases, maintaining some liquidity provides more overall stability than eliminating low-cost debt as quickly as possible. Now consider how this plays out during uncertain times. Economic slowdowns, job instability, unexpected expenses. These aren't rare events. They're part of the financial landscape. And in those moments, liquidity becomes the most valuable asset because it provides time. Time to adjust, time to make decisions without pressure, time to avoid turning a small problem into a larger one. Without it, even minor disruptions can cascade. Expenses get pushed onto credit cards, balances rise, interest accumulates, stress increases, and the system becomes harder to manage, all because the initial strategy removed the buffer that could have absorbed the impact. This is where the original question comes back into focus. Is paying off debt at all costs always smart? The answer becomes clearer. Not if it eliminates flexibility, not if it ignores how reporting works, not if it creates vulnerability to unexpected events, and not if it leads to decisions that need to be reversed later under worse conditions. The smarter approach isn't about speed alone. It's about coordination, balancing payoff with liquidity, timing payments to align with reporting, keeping utilization within optimal ranges, avoiding unnecessary complexity, and recognizing that financial systems respond to specific signals, not just good intentions. Because once those signals are understood, small adjustments can create significant improvements. A payment made a few days earlier, a small balance left intentionally, a decision to hold on to cash instead of eliminating a low-interest balance immediately. These aren't dramatic changes, but they create alignment. And alignment is what turns effort into results, because without it, even disciplined behavior can produce inconsistent outcomes. And with it, the same behavior becomes far more effective. That's the difference. Not more effort, not more restriction, just better timing, better balance, and a clearer understanding of how the system actually works. If this changed the way debt payoff and credit really work, share it with someone who's been rushing to zero without realizing the trade-offs. Subscribe for more content that breaks down financial systems in a way that actually helps decisions make sense.